Thanks for joining me back. This is part 2. We're going through the guidebook for King's Quest 6. And this is the Isle of the Crown. Of the 4 islands, the Isle of the Crown is the one which will seem the most conventional to travelers from distant lands. It is largely inhabited by members of the human race, men and women of pleasant disposition and generous hospitality. As stated earlier, the Isle of the Crown is comprised of the Castle of the Crown, a quaint village, and the docks from which travel among the islands is commenced. The village. The village on the Isle of the Crown is a small one. Its stucco walls gleam in the hot sun. Its dirt paths are clean and well maintained. Its vegetation is lush. The shop merchants are friendly and seem to delight in unusual trades. Though little of mine survived the shipwreck, the few trinkets that I had on my person or managed to salvage from the shore were deemed unusual enough in that distant realm to obtain a few necessities. I also found the villagers eager to share what they had in return for honest work, so I had survived quite comfortably there. Village life is one of cheerful routine. The villagers rise at first light to do their chores before the tropical sun reaches its peak. Then a light midday meal is served. The bulk of the afternoon is reserved for indoor activities, reading and scholastics for the young population and naps for their elders. Everyone seems to prize this quiet time. When the sun goes down, communal activities are frequent. If there are no weddings or other festivities, I must admit that I'm quite fond of these local celebrations, the families often gather informally for a plain but plentiful supper, music, and conversation. Though most families are modest, none are in want. Servants are used in the more affluent households, but most of the citizens cheerfully rely on their own strong hands for the work of daily life. What serving class exists is generally well treated, though even in this generalization, I did note a few exceptions. The docks. Beyond the village lies the docks, a place of bustle and excitement. Even the humblest citizens of the Isle of the Crown frequently enjoys visiting the other islands in the kingdom. In return, it is not uncommon to see all manner of strange creatures frequenting the village shops from the kingdom's other islands. All travel between the islands is focused on the docks. At the docks, and indeed at a single vessel. That vessel is simply called the ferry, and it is a pleasant enough little ship, well maintained, as it befits its value to the kingdom. The ferryman is a jolly fellow, patient even with the youngest of his passengers. His young son helps manage the vessel and keeps her shipshape. The story of the ferry is an interesting one, particularly if you recall the fate of my own ship. The islands, it seems, have always been surrounded by terrible eddies and currents that make seagoing nearly impossible. The family that runs the ferry has done so for generations, each father passing on to his son the secret of the tricky navigation. Many believe that the ferryman's family line has an uncanny instinct for the sea around the islands. It is said that they sail by the blood in their veins. One thing is certain, I would not venture to sail a ship in these waters, so whatever the secrets of the ferryman's family, thank the stars for it. The Castle of the Crown. The Castle of the Crown is a stunning palace giving testimony to the skill of the kingdom's architects and the richness of its treasury. The castle is a monument of marble, gold, and precious gems with tall arched ceilings and artistic fittings. I am told that it was built 100 years ago by King Alifit as a present to his bride, Queen Astar. The previous castle, also called the Castle of the Crown, was large and drafty and had served as the seat of the royal family for over 300 years. It is said that King Alifit was cautious over his new bride's fragile health and built the new palace with thick walls for protection from the high winds and cool hallways for respite from the blazing tropical sun. The castle is made even more exotic by the race of guard dogs that serve and protect the palace. These wondrous creatures seem to combine the best qualities of canine and human. Speaking in gruff voices and armed with swords or pikes, the guard dogs are strong and intelligent and have loyally served the crown through the centuries. Despite my status as a stranger, I was granted a visit with the reigning king and queen. Their openness and accessibility, added to the lack of drawbridges, moats, or battlements of any kind, made clear to me the innocence of this kingdom that had never known war or treachery. Had I been a viper in disguise, I would have been granted an intimate audience just as readily. As a citizen of the larger, more dangerous world, it made me feel a little nervous and honor-bound not to betray such trust to me. I met the king and queen in the castle's throne room. The throne room is a vast hall, more ornate than anything these poor eyes have ever seen. Standing before the two thrones in that cavern of gold, I felt as though I stood before fabled Olympus itself. Yet raising my eyes up slowly to those noble faces, I saw nothing of judgment in their eyes, nothing of disdain. Indeed, their faces were full of guileless welcome and kindness. As for the rulers of this kingdom themselves, Captain Caliphem, though not a large man, has an air of strength and self-assurance about him. He has the face of a scholar and the eyes of a gentle benefactor. Of Queen Ilaria, his beautiful wife, my first impression was of hair the color of night and skin as pale as dawn. She smiled at me graciously, and I could see the sadness there, for despite the glory of the palace around them, the hall seemed to weigh on the couple with their emptiness. They are the last of the royal family, and growing into middle age have yet to produce an heir. The king and queen listened with interest to my tale of shipwreck. King Caliphem asked astute questions of my homeland and the lands of my travel. He seemed to know something of other lands, perhaps from the same source that had brought the name of the land of the Green Isles to Daventry. He was most curious, and as a thinker seemed intrigued by any new idea I might offer. Unfortunately for him, my ideas on such things as kingdoms and civilizations were rather simple ones. I sensed that, despite his interest, he would be content to have these other kingdoms remain remote from his own. Neither hungry for conquest nor anxious for change, his kingdom would remain isolated. Indeed, except for the lack of an heir, it seemed the good king and queen did provide the kingdom with all it could ever desire. Having met the royal couple and recovered sufficiently from my ordeal at sea, I began to feel quite curious about the other islands in the kingdom, and so I put my itching feet in the care of the jolly ferryman. We'll pause here and we'll pick up at part 3.